Welcome to Storytime with Clint Sensei. Today's reading is a nonfiction work by the title of The Idol of San Vittore by Indro Montanelli, translation and adaptation by Erwin C. Lesner. My story begins on that day in March 1944 when His Excellency General Della Rovere, intimate of Marshal Badoglio and technical advisor to Britain's General Alexander, was brought to San Vittore Prison and put in the cell across from mine. The Italian underground was attempting, at that time, to disrupt the flow of German reserves to the fighting front in the south. The general, I learned, had been captured by the Germans in a northern province when he was put ashore by an Allied submarine to assume command of guerrilla operations there. I was impressed by his aristocratic bearing. Even Franz, the brutal German overseer of the prison, stood at attention before him. Of all the German-operated confession factories in Italy, San Vittore was the worst. Captured Italian underground fighters who stood up under primary routine questioning were brought here. Then Gestapo Commissar Müller and his bunch of picked SS men, by methods now celebrated in the annals of refined torture, usually squeezed desired information out of even the toughest customers. 6 months had passed since my own arrest. I had been interrogated several times, and I was exhausted and discouraged. I sometimes wondered how much longer I could hold out. Then, to my astonishment one day, Sarasso, one of the Italian guards, unlocked my cell door and told me that General Della Rovere wished to see me. The general's door was unlocked, as always. Moreover, he had a cot, whereas the rest of us slept on bare planks. Immaculately groomed, monocle in his right eye, he greeted me courageously. "Captain Montanelli, I knew before I landed that you were here. His Majesty's government is keenly interested in your fate. We are confident that even when you fall before a German firing squad, you will fulfill your duty, your most elementary duty as an officer. But make yourself at ease, pray." Only then did I realize that I had been standing at attention, heels touching, thumbs against trouser seams. "We officers all lead provisional lives, do we not?" he asked. "An officer is, so to speak, a bridegroom of the goddess of death." He paused, polishing his monocle with a white handkerchief, and it occurred to me that names often reflected the bearer's personality. Della Rovere means "of the oak." Here, surely, was a man of solid timber. "They have already sentenced me," he continued. "How about you?" "Not yet, Your Excellency," I replied almost apologetically. "They will," he said. "The Germans are rigorous when they expect a confession, but they are also chivalrous in their esteem for those who refuse to confess. You have not talked. Well done. That means that you will be honored by being shot through the chest, not through the back. I urge you to persist in your silence. But should you undergo torture, I don't mean to question your moral strength, but there are limits to physical endurance. I suggest that you give them just one name. Mine. Tell them that, whatever you did, you were acting under my orders. By the way, what are the charges against you?" I told him everything, unreservedly. His Excellency listened like a father confessor. From time to time, he nodded approvingly. "Your case is as clear-cut as mine," he said when I had finished. "We were both apprehended carrying out official orders. Our only remaining duty is to die fighting on the field of honor. It should be easy to die decently." When Sarasso was locking me back in my cell, I implored him to send me to a barber the following day. And that night I folded my trousers and creased them on the window lattice before stretching myself out on my plank to sleep. During the following days, I saw many prisoners visit the general's cell. When they came out, They all seemed to hold themselves more erectly. They no longer looked dejected. Noise and disorder in our isolated sector abated. Number 215, who had rent the air with cries for his wife and children, fell silent and showed great composure when he was called for interrogation. Sarasso told me that after talking with the general, almost everyone asked for the barber and for a comb and soap. Prison guards took to shaving daily. Even Mueller, when he inspected the place, grudgingly commended the general improvement in discipline and dignity. Best of all, the confession factory no longer produced confessions. The men persisted in a stubborn silence. From his own great store of courage, Della Rovere gave them strength to endure. From his own experiences under arrest, he gave them invaluable advice. "The most dangerous hours are in the early afternoon," he would warn them. "The mere longing for distraction could make you confess." Or, "Don't stare at the walls. Close your eyes from time to time, and the walls will lose their power to choke you." He reprimanded them for neglecting their appearance. Neatness builds morale. He knew that the military formalities they observed with him strengthened their pride, and he never stopped reminding them of their duty toward Italy. After a while, a rumor began to sweep through the prison that the general was a counter-spy, a German stool pigeon. The Italian guards, even though drawn from the dregs of Mussolini's old regime, felt there were limits to the humiliations they would take. They agreed among themselves to watch the general constantly. If he turned out to be a stool pigeon, they were determined to strangle him. Next morning, Della Rovere received number 203, a major who was supposed to have more than the usual amount of information and who had not talked. Sarasso lingered near the cell door, and other Italian guards watched nearby. "You will undergo extreme torture," they heard the general say to the major. "You must confess nothing. Keep your mind blank. Force yourself to believe that you know nothing. Even thinking of the secrets you are guarding might bring them to your lips." The major listened ashen-faced, as the general said to him what he had said to me. "If you are driven to speak, tell them that whatever you did on my orders." That afternoon, an apologetic Sarasso brought His Excellency a few roses, a gift of the Italian prison guards. The general accepted the flowers graciously. He seemed not to have the slightest notion that he had been distrusted. One morning, the Germans came for Colonels P and F. Before being led to the courtyard, the officers were granted one last wish, to say farewell to the general. I saw them at his cell door, standing at attention. I couldn't hear what the general said to them, but both officers smiled. He shook their hands, something I'd never seen him do. Then, as if suddenly aware of the Germans present, he stiffened, raised his hand, and saluted. The men returned the salute, turned on their heels, and walked to their deaths. We learned later that both shouted, "Long live the King!" as they faced the firing squad. That afternoon I was questioned again. Commissar Mueller told me that my fate would depend on the results of this interrogation. If I were to persist in my silence, I stared at him with wide-open eyes, yet I could hear nothing. I couldn't even see him. I saw instead the pale, composed faces of Colonels P and F, the smiling face of His Excellency. After the Germans had questioned me in vain for 2 hours, the interrogation came to an end. I was not tortured, but even if I had been, I think I would have been able to conceal everything. On my way back, I asked Sarasso to let me stop at His Excellency's cell. The general put aside the book he was reading and looked at me searchingly as I stood at attention. Then, before I spoke, he said. Yes, that's what I expected you to do. You couldn't have done differently. He rose. I cannot put all I would say into words, Captain Montanelli. But since there is no one else to report on us, let this upright Italian guard be a witness to what we say in these our last days. Let him listen to every word. I am well satisfied, Captain. I am pleased indeed. Bravo. That night I was truly alone in this world, but my beloved country seemed nearer and dearer and more real than ever before. I never saw the general again. Only after the liberation did I learn about his end. One of the survivors of Fiesole told me the story. Fiesole was a notorious extermination camp where the ways of dying were intricate and of great variety. When General Della Rovere was transferred there by armored train, together with hundreds of others, he maintained his dignity. Throughout the trip, he sat on a heap of knapsacks the others had gathered to provide him with a couch. He refused to rise when a Gestapo officer inspected the train. Even when the officer slapped him across the face and shouted, I know you, you swine, Bertoni! He remained unperturbed. Why should he explain to this blundering German that his name was not Bertoni, but Della Rovere, that he was a general of an army corps, intimate friend of Badoglio, and technical advisor to Alexander? Unruffled, he picked up his monocle and squeezed it on again. The German walked away cursing. At Fiesole, the general no longer enjoyed the privileges granted him in San Vittore. He was quartered with everyone else in a single barrack, and, like everyone else, he was put to work. His fellow prisoners sought to spare him the lowliest chores, took turns substituting for him. But he never tried to evade his tasks, difficult as they might be for a man who was no longer young. And at night, he reminded his comrades that they were not convicts, but officers. Facing his glaring monocle and listening to his voice, they stood a little straighter. The massacre at Fiesole on June 22, 1944, may have been in reprisal for the Allied victories near Genoa. At any rate, on orders from Milan, 65 names were drawn from a total of 400 inmates. As a Lieutenant Tito read the list, the doomed men had to step forward from the ranks. When he called the name Bertoni, no one stepped forward. Bertoni! He roared, staring at Della Rovere. His Excellent did not budge. Did Tito want to show indulgence to a doomed man? No one could say. In any case, he suddenly smiled. All right, he said. Della Rovere, if you wish. Everyone held his breath, watching the general. He pulled his monocle from his pocket, and with a remarkably steady hand squeezed it against his right eye. General Della Rovere, if you please, he said calmly as he joined the waiting group. The 65 were handcuffed and led to the wall. All were blindfolded except His Excellency, who steadfastly refused, and they granted him his wish. All 4 machine guns were brought into firing position. His Excellency stepped forward, his bearing proud and determined. Gentlemen, officers, he called in a firm, resounding voice, as we face the ultimate sacrifice, may our thoughts turn faithfully toward our beloved country. Long live the King! Tito shouted, Fire! And the machine guns rattled. The true story of General Della Rovere, which I learned after his death, is one of heroism and an impersonation almost beyond belief. For the idol of San Vittore was no general. Neither Badoglio nor Alexander had ever heard of him, and his name was not Della Rovere. He was one Bertoni, a native of Genoa, a thief and confidence man with a long prison record. The Germans had arrested him for some petty crime, and during the questioning had realized that the man was a superb natural actor. They believed that his unscrupulous outlook, coupled with his talent for acting, would make him an excellent agent for tricking information out of guerrilla prisoners. Bertoni was ready for a deal. He would do as requested in return for preferred treatment in prison and early release. The Germans invented the Della Rovere story and coached him in his part. When Bertoni was sent to San Vittore, he asked for, and was granted, a brief period during which he would gain the trust of the men he would later victimize. But Bertoni was shrewder than they knew. He was determined to trick no one but the Germans. And then came the amazing transformation. Acting General Della Rovere's part, Bertoni became Della Rovere. He undertook a superhuman task: to make San Vittore confession-proof, and its inmates strong enough to meet their fate. And by his commanding presence, his impeccable grooming, his high courage and faith, he brought a new dignity and sense of personal worth to the poor devils who were incarcerated there. But finally, he knew his time was running out. Commissar Mueller grew more and more impatient with his delays. Why weren't the confessions coming through? When Della Rovere spoke to me that last day in his cell and asked the guard to be a witness, he knew that it was all over, that this was the only way the outside world might learn his story, the only way that Italy might know he had kept his trust. On June 22, 1945, the first anniversary of the massacre at Fiesole, I stood in the Cathedral of Milan and watched the Cardinal Prince Archbishop of that city consecrate the coffins of the heroes of Fiesole. The Cardinal knew whose body lay in the coffin marked Della Rovere. He knew, too, that no one had a better right to the title of general than the occupant of that coffin, the former thief and jailbird, Bertoni.